Are you looking for art that inspires and gives back? Check out Artery Inc., a Milwaukee-based, woman-owned company blending anatomical art with purpose. From tees to stickers, their designs celebrate the human body and support real causes. Right now, shop the End Violence in Healthcare campaign, made in partnership with PulseCheck Wisconsin. Proceeds help raise awareness and push for safer workplaces for healthcare workers. Visit arteryinc.com and wear your support with pride. That's arteryinc.com. Art, wellness, and action. Welcome to PulseCheck Wisconsin. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to PulseCheck Wisconsin, where we break down the politics of public health, healthcare access, and the policy shaping our everyday lives. Today, we are digging into one of the most defining issues of our time, healthcare here in the state of Wisconsin, women's reproductive freedoms, the cost of care for working families, and the future leadership of our state. And joining us here today is someone at the center of it all. We have State Senator Kelda, who is also candidate for the governor's state of Wisconsin. Senator Royds is a lifetime advocate for reproductive rights, a former assembly member, a small business owner. She's a mom as well, and someone who has been deeply vocal about the real-world consequences of our healthcare here in the state of Wisconsin. So with that being said, Senator Royds, thank you so much for joining us here today on PulseCheck Wisconsin.
I'm happy to be with you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for folks who may only know your name from the headlines, how do you introduce yourself and the work that you're doing right now in the state of Wisconsin?
I'm a mom from Medford working to make Wisconsin a place where everyone, no matter who you are or where you're from, has the freedom to thrive. I've done that in the state Senate. I've done that as a healthcare advocate, as an attorney and small business owner, and most of all, just as a Wisconsinite who cares about making a better world.
Absolutely. And that's so important now, especially the times that we're in right now. It seems like there's huge divides both here in the state as well as federally. And so people want to hear that. People want to know, who you are as a person and, what you're fighting for. But as you run for governor, just looking across healthcare, looking across the lines of reproductive freedoms and the cost of care in our state, what to you feels most urgent in this moment?
Well, I would say two things. Number one, we are about to see the collapse of healthcare, particularly in rural areas across the state. We have about 270,000 Wisconsinites that are projected to lose access to health insurance over the next couple of years. And that's an urgent problem, even if for people who are lucky enough to have private insurance, because it's going to force the closure of many rural hospitals and clinics, the loss of providers, and it's going to cause everyone else's insurance premiums to skyrocket. Expanding coverage and access to health insurance that's affordable and high quality is one of my number one priorities as governor. The other thing are the tremendous threats to reproductive freedom at both the state and federal levels. We have right-wing ideologues who are just hell-bent on imposing their narrow worldview on the rest of us. They want to have a complete abortion ban. The Republican nominee for governor, likely nominee Tom Tiffany, voted for a federal abortion ban that has no exceptions, bans virtually all abortions nationwide. This could be a huge emergency for the country.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on multiple episodes here. You've seen the headlines across the state. And even yourself personally, I've seen headlines from you, seen videos for you. You've been very open about your own personal experiences as a patient and as a mom and as someone who has suffered a miscarriage before in the past. And, only if you're comfortable, can you take us back to that time? What was happening for yourself as a patient? And what did supportive care look like for you in that moment?
Well, my husband and I were excited to try to have a baby. And I have two stepdaughters who are wonderful, but we were ready to have another baby or have a little baby. And was so excited to be pregnant. And about 8 or 9 weeks in, we went for an ultrasound, and the nurse midwife basically said, looks like you're going to be heading for a miscarriage because we don't see the activity that we would normally expect. And sure enough, a couple of days later, I started to miscarry, and I did not realize how physically painful it would be. And it was a process that takes a couple of days. And, I didn't really realize until after it happened to me and I started talking to friends how common it is. It's just not something that we talk about in this country. We don't tend to talk really about pregnancy. We don't talk about reproductive health. And, just like you don't talk about religion and money, right? We're Midwesterners. But to realize how many of my friends had experienced miscarriage, how common this is, and how many people require medical intervention to complete their miscarriage safely so that they can, stay alive and then hopefully go on to have another baby, as I was lucky enough to be able to go on and have my 3 beautiful children.
And, you brought up some good points there. Aside from your own personal take on it, I agree. We don't talk that much about complications of pregnancy because aside from all those things, there's also that emotional component of it too. A lot of moms that come into the emergency department, the first question that they ask me is, was this my fault? What could I have done to prevent this? And, how common it is something that we have to talk about. It's not your fault. This is something that happens, unfortunately, commonly. And in my estimation, that's something that a lot of people will need in that situation, right? You need those clinicians to be there for you. When you think about some of the clinicians who cared for you in that time, in those moments, what stood out for you and what did you need from the healthcare system in that moment?
Well, I needed compassionate support, as you just talked about. You always wonder, like, what could I have, did I do something to make this happen? Should I not have ridden my bike or whatever? I mean, I think, society is really primed to blame women for any outcome. If a child grows up and they commit a crime, we say, well, probably because they had a bad mom, a bad parent.
Mm-hmm.
And as women, we're conditioned to take that responsibility onto ourselves. And, the truth is that we really don't know why so many pregnancies do end in miscarriage, but this is a part of life. And, oftentimes the pregnancies that are ending may be unviable, right? But in my case, it was early enough along that there was really no, there was no indication of anything. And we didn't, there was nothing to really investigate or figure out why. And so I just needed people who were going to be compassionate as to the emotional loss that I was going to experience and support me with the physical pain, because it is a very isolating experience.
And now you transpose that to today, right? When you see headlines almost daily, almost weekly, when you see lawmakers attempting to regulate miscarriage care, to even redefine abortion, or to criminalize actions made between patients and their physician, how does that land with you as someone who has lived it as well as a lawmaker?
It makes me furious. It makes me furious for women. I experienced a late first trimester miscarriage. And I think about women who go to that 20-week ultrasound. They have painted the nursery. They are ready. They're so excited to have their baby, and they go and they find out something is horribly wrong, and that they're not going to have the baby that they dreamed of, or that the woman's life is in jeopardy, and abortion is the only way to protect her life and her health. And they're not allowed to get care here in Wisconsin. They have to travel out of state at great expense, away from their family, their home, their loved ones, their support network, to an unfamiliar provider in an unfamiliar location to receive abortion care. And that was happening under Roe v. Wade, and that's continuing to happen now. And, to me, that is such a dereliction of political duty. Politicians really have no business getting involved in people's personal medical decisions. We have our own life to live. We don't get to force our beliefs on somebody else. And I fundamentally believe that to be a core principle. If you want to live in a free society, you have to let people make decisions that might be different from the decisions that you would make. And that includes someone who is pregnant and doesn't want to be, or isn't ready to be a parent. Everyone needs access to safe abortion care, but it's also the freedom to form a family, right? I've done a lot of work on fertility treatment and coverage, a lot of work on helping women who get IUD insertions have options for pain relief, right? There's so many aspects of the system where we're just not meeting the reproductive health needs of women and girls across the spectrum, and we really need to step up and do a better job.
Absolutely. And even before, like you said, even before Roe v. Wade decision came out, even after we had, the walking back of some of those restrictions as an ER provider, I saw the results of many pregnant people who would come into the emergency department who may have sought abortion care over state lines or may have had a miscarriage. And they were scared, right? They were frightened. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. They didn't know if there was going to be legal repercussions because, they went across the state line to Illinois, or they went to Michigan, or they went wherever, right? And so there is still some of that doubt, even to this day, right? Because a lot of people, there's so many headlines and there's so much that you hear about Senate bills coming out that are restricting abortion access, right? Or attempting to establish a fetal personhood. For someone who is listening right now and who is going through a miscarriage, what messages do you want them to hear? How would you approach them?
Well, I would say, first of all, I am so sorry for what you're experiencing and know that you are absolutely not alone. This is something that so many of us go through. And, I just wrap my arms around you and hope that you are assured that it is not your fault and that you can go on to have healthy pregnancies and healthy babies, and we will get through this.
Absolutely. Well, let's pivot right now. Let's talk about healthcare in general in the state of Wisconsin, because again, there's a lot of headlines about that as well. For the typical family in the state of Wisconsin, how would you describe the state of healthcare right now for them?
Unaffordable. Number one, it's really, really expensive, frustrating, arguing with the insurance company about what they're going to cover, trying to get an appointment. You often have to wait a long time or drive long distances. And I would say that it's, the system we have does not lead to great outcomes. This state has pretty high infant and maternal mortality, for instance. We have really shameful racial disparities in a lot of our healthcare outcomes. And just in general, in the United States, we spend more per person on average than almost any other developed country. And yet our health outcomes are actually worse. We have shorter lifespans. So we're doing it wrong. And that's because our dollars are spent really inefficiently. And I think there is a better way. I strongly believe that healthcare should be a right that all people have. It shouldn't be something that we're going to ration based on the job that you have or how much money you have. And that's the system we have right now. Your healthcare is rationed based on your job and your wealth. And to me, all of us are human beings living in bodies. We're all going to need healthcare. It should be something that we share as a society.
And I mean, we've seen premiums go up. We've seen deductibles. Prescription costs are just through the roof right now. That's aside from childcare and housing as well. What do you see both here, in the state of Wisconsin as well as federally? What do you see as being the reason these costs are being driven up so much at this point?
Well, part of it is the profit motive, right? We've decided that healthcare is going to be largely for profit in this country. So insurance companies that are owned by investors and hedge funds obviously want to see those returns. And how do they get the returns? It's by taking your premiums and denying care. But the problem is, the money isn't actually going into providers' pockets. So providers are getting squeezed. I talk to physicians, who are, should all be doing financially fine. And they're talking about how their economics have really become squeezed and they're not able to practice in the way that they want to. I talked to one doctor who said she used to do a procedure and she would get about $3,500 per procedure. And it's short, it's 15 minutes. However, it's extremely high stakes. This is a procedure that, if done incorrectly, could paralyze or kill the patient. And now she said her rate for doing this is about $65 because of the way that the contracts that these for-profit payers have negotiated. So we've got huge problems. In Wisconsin, we've got provider shortages. That's one reason that I championed the APRN modernization bill to allow expanded practice by nurse practitioners for things like primary care, where there just are not physicians in rural areas. And I think we've got so much further to go, especially as we face this looming crisis of people losing their care and coverage. And I've developed a plan, and I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, well, let's get into it, because I am as much as a rural provider as I am an urban provider too. And a lot of, whenever I go into the EDs in these rural locations, a lot of the rural patients that I see, as well as some of the rural listeners to this show, are watching their clinics and their OB units close. And you talked about the APRN bill that is going to serve to kind of help, some of those clinics stay afloat and allow some of the resources to be available for those patients. But what steps should the next administration take to stabilize access and going forward?
Well, for a long time, Democrats have fought to expand Badger Care, expand Medicaid here in Wisconsin. We're one of the very few states that has not done it. And I'm very sorry to say that as a result of the big ugly bill, the federal budget that passed last summer, that option is now functionally off the table for Wisconsin until things change federally. And I know some of the other Democratic candidates are still touting this as their plan for healthcare. And I just think that's wholly inadequate, because it's just not feasible. And we shouldn't tell people that we're going to do something that we really can't deliver on. So my plan for healthcare basically will expand the great nonprofit, competitive, low-cost, high-quality health insurance that I enjoy as a state employee, as your state senator, and it will open it up to allow anyone to buy in. So if you're an individual and you want to buy health insurance, you could go on the exchange, or you could buy into the state plan if that's better for you. And you could have an individual plan or a family plan. You can have a high deductible plan or a low deductible plan. I have 3 young kids at home, and I've got 1 young adult who's still on our healthcare plan. So I obviously have the low deductible plan because we use a lot of healthcare, right? And so these wonderful plans, and they are nonprofit payers. So there isn't that profit motive, and they're more efficient. They spend more of the dollars that they collect on healthcare and fewer on administration and none on profit. And that kind of plan could really be transformative for the state. So if you're a small business owner, you could buy in for yourself or for your business. Say you own a big manufacturing company and you're tired of getting the 22% a year premium hikes from Aetna or Blue Cross Blue Shield. Why not give the state plans a try and see those premiums go down? To me, this is a way to expand people's freedom by decoupling their healthcare from their employer. It's voluntary, totally voluntary, right? So if you like what is happening now for healthcare, keep it. But the more people that we insure in the state, the better it is for all of us. Number one, we're keeping people productive in the workforce. People with chronic disease are getting those diseases managed so they're able to live and thrive and be productive. We're lowering the cost of premiums for people because more people are in the pool, right? So people who would pay huge amounts if they were on the exchange and buying an individual plan are now part of a really big pool. So they don't have to take on that additional risk themselves. And we're lowering the cost for taxpayers too, because when we have more people who are insured and we're spreading the cost of our health insurance over more people, then the basically cost per person goes down.
Yeah, and a lot of that too. You've heard it, majorly, like you said, on the Democratic side here in the state of Wisconsin, people saying, we need to expand this access to care, and giving the potential downsides of not doing so. But we are at a point in time here in our country. There's a political divide as big as the Grand Canyon right now, right?
Right.
How do you, in your first 100 days, hope to serve in a way? How do you approach working across the aisle in that respect to try to get to some agreement for the betterment of the people of the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, Chris, this is a big differentiator for me in my campaign because I actually have a really strong track record of working across the aisle on all kinds of issues that are important to people. I mean, as I said, I'm a mom from Medford, and my number one goal is to make Wisconsin a place where everyone has the freedom to thrive. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you live in a rural community or an urban one, or whether you live in the suburbs, right? You deserve to have high quality public schools that will help your kids learn and grow. You deserve to have affordable, accessible childcare and healthcare that actually works for you and your family. So the nurse modernization bill that I referenced earlier, that was actually a Republican bill. For years, I was the only Democrat on that bill because I thought it was the right thing to do. And actually, our governor, Tony Evers, who I greatly support and appreciate, he actually vetoed that bill several times. But finally, we were able to build enough support on the Democratic side of the aisle, and that bill became law after years of effort this fall. And, that's the kind of willingness to reach across the aisle and partner with people whom I might disagree with on a whole host of issues. But on one issue, we agree and we can move forward. I helped to make Wisconsin one of the first states to ban BPA in children's baby bottles and sippy cups. Again, working across the aisle, building bipartisan support. And I think those skills are really important for anyone, but definitely if you want to be governor, and definitely if you want to be governor of a purple state, you got to be able to deliver for people.
Absolutely. What in your estimation, because again, it's a great difference, as talking to people one-on-one and then talking to them after they've done an interview. But we've seen a lot of bills that have attempted, like you said, to redefine abortion care, regulate miscarriage care, to essentially hinder the expansion of some of these programs outside of just Badger Care expansion to provide health care. What do you think, the hiccup has been, and what do you think some of these regulations and some of this, I guess, more sort of deterrence to doing this, what do you think this is about?
I think it's really about trying to control and shame women. The impulse to regulate abortion or regulate women's personal and private medical decisions has nothing to do with, being pro-life, because the very same people that are pushing these bills are the ones who are creating more unintended pregnancies by refusing to support comprehensive sex ed that's honest with young people. They refuse to support increased access to contraception. And in fact, some of them actually want to ban birth control, and they're attacking birth control at the federal and state levels. And it's certainly not about concern for babies, because these are also people that oppose paid family and medical leave, which is a huge way that you can help reduce fertility. For years, when I was the head of NARAL Pro-Choice Wisconsin, I actually made reducing our infant mortality rates a key priority for NARAL. And I couldn't get a single Republican interested in these very low-cost interventions that can dramatically improve survival for the babies. And the Republicans were just not interested. Abortion bans are here for one reason, and they kill women. ProPublica has already announced that abortion bans, they have found 7 instances that are verifiable where women would be alive today if that abortion ban had not been on the books. And I think about these women who, many of them spent their final days on Earth desperately, knowing that they needed an abortion, desperately trying to find somebody who would provide it for them, failing, and then dying. And that should never, never happen. But because politicians wanted to impose their radical right-wing views on us, those women are gone.
Milwaukee, we need your voice. The Medical College of Wisconsin is conducting a research study to better understand the experiences of young Black men with police in our city and how those experiences impact mental health. If you're a Black man between 18 and 30, including transgender men and non-binary individuals assigned male at birth, we want to hear from you. This is a one-time confidential interview where you share your story, help shape solutions, and get $75 for your time. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Let's work together to improve mental health and policing in Milwaukee. For more information or to sign up, call or text 414-436-6568. Again, that's 414-436-6568. This is your chance to be heard. Let's make a difference together. It's a tragedy. And like you said, these are lives that we are playing around with here, right? To be honest with you. These are deaths that don't need to occur. Now, I was talking to a friend the other day about some of the negative feedback that she was getting. And she was also a ER provider. And I said, if anything, we're putting ourselves out of business. We want to advocate for you not being in the emergency department, right? And so, that you speak to that point in that these are politicians playing politics, but the Wisconsin people are paying the price. The patients are paying the price. These families are paying a price that is insurmountable when you're talking about potentially dying from some of these complications.
Right. And again, for a provider, just think about what a horrible situation we're putting our physicians in to basically not just risk your medical license or civil liability, like getting sued, but to risk prison time,
Mm-hmm.
to risk being incarcerated because you didn't wait long enough for a woman to be close to death. And what makes me angry is how the anti-choice movement wants to blame physicians or blame pro-choice advocates for these women's deaths. That's actually part of their plan. And, to say that basically we were being hysterical and that, of course, doctors should step in and save their lives. But that's actually not how these laws are written. They are written specifically to put the fear of God into physicians, do not intervene. And as you know, pregnancy is dangerous. Every pregnancy is different and things can be fine and go south in a heartbeat. And I want our physicians to feel free to do what they need to do to take care of my health. And I want to be the one in charge of what happens with me and my family, not politicians in the Capitol somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, let's imagine, we're fast forwarding to next year, right? And you're sworn in as governor of the state of Wisconsin. In your first 100 days, what top actions would you take in that step?
Well, I want to raise wages for Wisconsin. That means increasing the minimum wage, and it means restoring collective bargaining rights so that workers have power to basically advocate for themselves with employers. I want to dramatically lower costs, especially on the big ticket items like healthcare that we've talked about, prescription drugs, housing, childcare, utility costs, and I want to expand freedom. We're living in a very dangerous and scary time right now as Americans. We have a regime in Washington that has essentially turned American communities and American streets into war zones. They have put armed federal agents who are masked, who are unaccountable, and given them free rein to terrorize, brutalize, and even murder Americans. And we need a governor who has a spine of steel and is going to stand up to them. So a key priority that I have is making sure that we are using every tool at our disposal to protect Wisconsinites from the harms of the Trump administration. Certainly the economic harms of things like tariffs that are crushing our family farmers and small business owners like me, but also the very real physical harm that is happening in communities across the country and in our neighboring states of Minnesota and Illinois.
Some voters and some of my friends, right? I've had colleagues that I know that have moved to Canada because they're so concerned about what's going on right now, right? And so these changes and these effects in the communities are very tangible for many people. And some voters worry that these changes can take years, right, in order to reverse or to get to a point of stability. What do you think is low-hanging fruit? What do you think can be accomplished quickly in, let's say the first couple months of, you being governor? What do you think could be accomplished in that time frame?
Well, I think we can accomplish a great deal. First of all, our state for a long time has really starved our public schools and our local governments of the resources they need to thrive. And it's not because we don't have the money. It's because we've taken what was once a good progressive tax structure and flattened it so that millionaires and billionaires and big corporations, not only do they not have to pay their fair share, in many cases, they don't really have to pay anything at all. And then that means that the rest of us are shouldering all that burden. Meanwhile, our property taxes are skyrocketing because these local communities and schools have to go to referendum to keep the lights on. Do you want to see mass layoffs of teachers? Do you want to see school closures? Do you want to lose, snow plows from your local community? Well, if not, then you've got to pass these referendums. And that puts neighbors in an impossible position. And it's all a result of Republicans' fiscal mismanagement of the state. So we can fix that in a budget. And we can do a lot to make these statutory changes, right? To get rid of restrictions on health care, to expand access. And as I mentioned, open up the state health insurance plan and, by the way, the state retirement pension plan to anybody to buy in. All of that can be done within the state budget, but only if we have a governor who has the courage and the competence to actually get things done. And I think sometimes the problem that we run into with Democratic elected officials is they might have good ideas, but they're not willing to throw a punch or take a punch, as Nancy Pelosi would say, for the children. And I am. I've spent my career, almost 25 years in and around state government, actually delivering change. And I think when you look at all the good folks who are running for governor, nobody has my track record or my experience of actually getting things done in every kind of legislative environment. Democratically controlled, Republican controlled, or split legislature. And I think that is the essential component that we're going to need to be successful. We can fully fund our public schools. We can stop this voucher scam that is draining hundreds of millions of dollars a year from our public schools. We can have communities that are thriving here in Wisconsin, but we need to have the political courage to actually get it done and the ability to get it done. And I'm the candidate that has shown throughout my career that I have that.
For listeners who are worried now, because again, like you said, a lot of people are beside themselves, a lot of people are scared, and they have reason to be. What is the one thing that you want them to take away from this conversation?
We are in this together. And this country has faced unimaginable things in the past. We can defeat this. We can get through this, not without harm, not without scars, and not without working really, really hard. This is a terrifying time, but this is also an opportunity for us to work together to build a better world. If there's one thing that we can learn from this Republican regime, it's that they are not afraid to use power to hurt people, to take away our rights, to destroy our economy, and to line their own pockets. They're not afraid to use power. We can use power to make people's lives better, to deliver high-quality public education and health care and affordable housing and all the things that we need to thrive as a society if we're willing to use political power. I'm not talking about breaking the law and shredding the Constitution the way that Republicans do.
Yeah, let's be clear.
As a lawyer, that's deeply offensive to me. But I am talking about electing political leaders who have the spine, that courage to stand up to these bullies and billionaires, as I have throughout my whole career, and have the capability, the knowledge, competence, the experience to put all the chips on the table and say, we are doing this, and actually lead. And I think oftentimes that's the missing piece. It's not that we don't have good ideas. It's that we don't have the political courage or the will to get it done. I do. And that's why I'm running. And that's why I hope that your listeners will vote for me on August 11th and November 3rd.
Where can people follow your work? How can they get involved in your campaign? How can they get involved in general? How do they get in contact?
So my website is KeldaRoys, ROYS.com. You can follow me on social media at Kelda Roys on different platforms. And I welcome people reaching out to me with their questions, their ideas, their concerns. This campaign, like all of my campaigns, is a grassroots one. It's not funded by corporate special interests or billionaires, certainly not Elon Musk, whom I called on to be arrested for violating our election bribery laws. It really, this campaign is a series of conversations with communities in every corner of Wisconsin. I'm a mom from Medford. I feel so lucky to have this opportunity to talk about leading our state, and I really want to hear from people and earn their support, one voter at a time.
Absolutely. Well, Senator Royce, thank you so much for joining us here today. This is why politics at the local level matters so much. I'm Dr. Chris Ford. This has been Pulse Check Wisconsin. Thank you so much.
Great to see you. Thanks, Dr. Ford.
As always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and if you need me, come and see me.